Evening, friends. Now, this time again, very familiar faces, national faculty with international repute, and they're the legends in the and very leading with the top knowledge, highly informative. Each time, they are always with us to teach us. We are always with you to learn from you. The top guidelines. The Scientific Committee Society of Econ 2019 in association with Indian College of Physicians, Medical Update 15. Now we have Dr. Sanjay GC Khilani sir and Professor Dr. Sanjay Rai. Uh, Yes, sir. So it was 25th January. Again, we had the same faces. And that time we were learning COVID vaccination. But between 2 months, the things have changed. Mutants have come up. And they have been absolutely topsy turvy, upside and down. What we were talking of clearing the web of confusion, we are led up again as a big mass of protoplasm. Now there have been the news. कोरोना दुनिया में बीते दिन 6.31 लाख केस आए ब्राजील को पीछे छोड़कर भारत फिर दूसरा सबसे संक्रमित देश बना तुर्की में भी केस बढ़े कोरोना की प्रचंड रफ्तार सबसे घातक दौर जांचें आधी फिर भी 14% ज्यादा रोगी संक्रमण दर 22% 25 वायरस डेथ्स इन राजस्थान हाईएस्ट फॉर सिंगल डे Corona explodes. There's a corona blast. Second wave COVID. New symptoms baffle Indian health fraternity. Which country has not been affected? Everyone has been involved. There's a total rat. The globe has turned into red. Now, this is a very familiar face. John C. Martin is a CEO of G-Led company who manufactures Remdesivir or Veklury. Veklury, Remdesivir name, approved by US, rejected by WHO. A big, we have to get answer from Dr. GC Khilani sir, what to do, where not to do. Mutants, COVID scare. What is a new COVID strain? A very baffling situation. Convalescent plasma has lost its stand because most of the population now get vaccinated. So if they get corona infection, would they be requiring convalescent plasma? A big question. No. What is COVID-19 vaccine so important? Why government, prime minister, everybody is pushing COVID-19 vaccine? We have Covaxin, Dr. Krishna Vallabh Bharat Biotech, and Adar Poonawalla Covishield. Now, just a day before, Russia's Sputnik 5 with efficacy 91%, 91.6%. And the long COVID, long corona, fever, mucus production, and so many so far. I will trust any vaccine if all the politicians take it before. Vaccine hesitancy. There's anti-vax. There's a QAnon group in the United States, which Trump is also a very big member of QAnon group. No vaccine needed. I have an immune system. My body, my choice. Why should I take a vaccine? Absolutely, I don't require it. So now, today is 13th April. We are back. I do request our mentor, Dr. K.K. Parikh sir, past president API, to give us blessings. Dr. K.K. Parikh sir.
Thank you, Dr. Pradhiman, for your kind words and giving the initial setup for the webinar. Good evening, friends. It's a great privilege and a pleasure for me to welcome all of you to this 15th series of webinar of Scientific Committee Society on update on vaccination, COVID variants, and long COVID reinfection. We all physicians have a lot of confusion and queries in our mind for the treatment of COVID infection, vaccination, which is better, which is not causing complications. What are the chances of reinfection? If somebody has taken vaccine, he has forgotten to take all precautionary measures like mask and social distancing. What are when a patient from COVID recovers, when should he take COVID vaccine? And there are so many things which probably and our very senior faculty of the country, Dr. G.C. Khilnani, Chairman of PSRI, Institution of Pulmonary Critical Care and Septic and Sleep Medicine, and Professor Sanjay K. Rai, Professor of Pulmonology from All India Institute of Medical Sciences are there. And I extend my thanks and gratitude to these two stalwarts of pulmonary diseases to be kind enough to accept our request for today's webinar. And they will be updating us. We will have more time for discussions, and we will open discussion for everybody so that you can ask any question. First, we will take the lectures, then discussion, and then panel discussion, and then we will open the webinar for question answers. So over to Dr. Girish Mathur for the proceedings, next proceedings. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. A very good evening to all. Honorable Dr. K.K. Parikh, sir, our mentor and guide, Dr. Pradyuman Sharma, Dr. Ramchandani, the leading faculty of the evening, Dr. G.C. Khilnani, Dr. Sanjay Rai. In January, February this year, we were about to write an obituary for coronavirus, but this tiny virus had different plans in store for us. COVID-19 made a re-entry with a vengeance. The second wave of COVID-19 in India appears to be more devastating than the first one. It is really scary to see the exponential rise in cases every day. There appears to be a variety of reasons for the unusual spike in number of cases in our country, namely the complacency and casual attitude on the part of masses, opening of our schools and other services, and emergence of various variants, some of which are more contagious, I think. So this evening we have two stalwarts, Dr. G.C. Khilnani and Dr. Sanjay Rai, who will enlighten us about the whole gamut of the present scenario about COVID-19, its resurgence and vaccinations. I will first invite Dr. G.C. Khilnani. Long COVID and reinfections. Dr. Khilnani is Chairman, PSRI Institute of Pulmonary Critical Care and Sleep Medicine. He is a former professor and head Department of Pulmonary Critical Care and Sleep Medicine, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi. He is an overseas fellow of critical care, Mount Sinai Medical School, New York. He is chairman, Credential Committee, Indian Society of Critical Care Medicine. He is fellow of American College of Chest Physicians, fellow of National Academy of Medical Sciences, past president of National College of Chest Physicians, member of Council of Governor and Regents, American College of Chest Physicians, and more than 250 publications to his credit. I invite Dr. G.C. Khilnani for his talk on long COVID and reinfections. Dr. Khilnani, sir.
Yeah, share my screen. So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Respected Dr. K.K. Parikh, Dr. Ramchandani, Dr. Mathur, and the vibrant Dr. Pradyuman Sharma, who never gets tired of pushing academics. And nothing would please me than to be amongst my seniors. And of course, I am alumni of SMS, and this is a different pleasure to be amongst the old guards, old friends, and sharing whatever little that I know. I also would at the outset thank Dr. Sanjay Rai, who once again agreed to join this meeting at a very short notice. He just returned yesterday from a long trip of Maharashtra on official duty. The topic that I was planning with Dr. Pradyuman Sharma, we thought of doing a COVID update on long COVID and mutants as well as vaccination. Actually, these are three topics in itself which merit a new separate webinar. But somehow we thought that I became a little greedy in choosing it, thinking that we'll be able to discuss. And this was 25th January that we referred to, and this slide from that particular fateful day when we saw that United States the cases were rising, India the cases were coming down. This is 25th of January. The cases were 14,849. And I put up this slide that are we sitting on a time bomb? And not later, actually it has exploded. And today, if you see, the United States cases have come down. The Indian cases have gone up. And we are in actually a deep trouble. That obviously is not a subject of discussion today. What we are discussing is something different. But whatever we are discussing has relevance to the incidence of this wretched disease, and all which has defined definite mortality also. What we are discussing is long COVID, which we have learned over a period of time. And what is long COVID? First, I'll introduce the subject and then I will talk about it. On the social media, there were 30 to 40,000 people who actually were contributing and talking about their woes. And this is 104th day of illness, fatigue, abdominal pain, nausea, muscle pain, blurred vision, severe acid reflux, chest pain, brain fog, headache, shortness of breath. Please help. This is a lady, young lady, as you can see, 104 days after COVID, has got all these symptoms. And this is not one. 90 days, extreme weakness, so on and so forth. These are people are feeling abandoned, dismissed, and brushed off. They go to the doctor, they say, no problem. You take zinconia, zincovid, vitamin C, and you are going to be fine. The fact of the matter is, in the SARS-1 outbreak, 3 years later, when the people were questioned on telephone, 40% of the patients had actually fatigue. So it's not a small thing. And this is a small study when the patient was assessed 60 days after the first symptom, only 18, that is 12.6%, were completely free of COVID-related symptoms. And 44% of the people have the worsened quality of life. And that is what is called long COVID. I need not recite the symptoms, the fatigue being the most common. So what is long COVID? That is person with symptoms 3 or more weeks after the COVID-19 is called long COVID. And if the symptoms are prevailing beyond 12 weeks, it is called chronic COVID. So there's no actually hard and fast discrimination between long COVID and chronic COVID. And of course, we all know the lung is most commonly affected, most common cause of mortality. And this was a very elegant study which came in respiratory research, where they did a CT scan during first, second, and third week after discharge of the patients who were quite severely ill. And it was found that the ground glass opacity and other findings were actually spontaneously improving. But nevertheless, some of the people will continue to have sequelae of this disease, and that is what we are going to discuss. Unfortunately, there are several extrapulmonary manifestations of COVID-19, and which could be dermatologic, like urticaria, vesicles, and Cardiac are very important. Sudden deaths, including myocarditis and myocardial injury, cardiac arrhythmias, cardiogenic shock. There could be hyperglycemia. We have seen a lot of diabetes which are precipitated and they continue to be diabetic. Gastrointestinal symptoms are extremely important and they sometimes they could be troubling. I have got patients who have got even after 4 months or 6 months of COVID are having very troubling GI symptoms and they don't respond to the treatment. Neurologic symptoms are extremely important. Beside Guillain-Barré syndrome, headaches and dizziness is very important. People are having forgetfulness and things like that. Of course, we know about the thromboembolic phenomenon that can be a separate subject, and liver and renal involvement is seen in small percentage of cases. So as I start my presentation with a case. This is a case that we had. A 67-year-old male, he was a diabetic. He presented with cough and fever and sore throat and breathlessness. He had fever, low saturation. His PaO2 was 62 on oxygen. He started on treatment of severe acute respiratory illness, was found to be COVID positive, had lymphopenia, CRP was high, D-dimer was high, and so was ferritin. And this was the CT, classical CT. Anybody, physician would say, okay, this is COVID and nothing else. So this patient was given everything, including tocilizumab, remdesivir, BiPAP support. This is not the subject of discussion. On 12th day of admission, which was 24th day of his illness, he was discharged. Comfortable, he became COVID negative on RT-PCR. He was discharged on oral steroids. But he came back 20 days afterwards. That is 44th day of his illness. He had new onset breathlessness. He has gabrat. He had fever also. Or he was febrile with the heart rate of 130. He had tachypnea. Blood pressure was normal. He had hypoxemia with a saturation of 89%. PaO2 was 48 millimeters of mercury on room air. So what has happened? He has become COVID negative. He has gone home. Anybody would assure him that, okay, all is well with you. You are off corona. You would have developed antibodies. So why he is there? So when the he was started on oxygen, when the CT was done, there was an enhancement of all his shadows, as you can see. And his CRP, ferritin, D-dimer, all were high, and also the LDH. So he was again started on steroids and IV antibiotics. Repeat COVID PCR was negative. So patient improved with conservative treatment with steroids, became afebrile. His CRP became 25, not 5. D-dimer was close to normal. Ferritin came to normal, and he was discharged home. So what is this long COVID? There's a study by Dr. Mandal, long COVID, a cross-sectional study of persisting symptoms, biomarkers and imaging abnormalities following hospitalization for COVID-19. 384 subjects with the median 54 days post-discharge, 53 reported persistent breathlessness, 69 fatigue, 14 had depression, 30% and 95% had persistent elevated D-dimer and C-reactive protein, and 4.8% on follow-up were required further imaging and pulmonary function testing. So this patient was discharged again on steroids, came back follow-up for OPD, 6-minute walk test was advised, and this 6-minute walk test, he could walk only 340 meters with a desaturation up to 83%. PFT showed restrictive ventilatory defect with the vital capacity of 64%. So what is happening? And this is what had happened. He had a high CRP which came to normal. Again, when he came back with excessive patient, CRP went up and again came down. Same thing happened with the D-dimer also. The question is, why are only some people affected? There are lakhs of people with COVID who recover and go home. Is there persistent viremia? Is there relapse or reinfection? Or is it that inflammatory and other immune reactions are still persisting? Is there a deconditioning or there is a mental factor as post-traumatic stress? And here I would present radiology of some of the more cases. And this is the signature of X-ray chest. Any good radiologist would say, oh, this is COVID only. And this is the classical picture of peripheral ground glassing opacity, but there is also interstitial thickening involved. This is a classical organizing pneumonia that we see with COVID infection. And this is a classical pulmonary fibrosis. I might have shown these CTs in my previous presentation. Besides this, pneumothorax is extremely common, even in the patients who are not on mechanical ventilation. And we see pneumomediastinum, which carries a worse prognosis in my experience, no data that I'm showing. So, and of course, we also see as a sequelae pleural thickening in some of the cases. So, how do we assess these patients, whether you call it a long COVID or sequelae of these patients? I'm not going to talk about the treatment of these cases. So, if the patient who is clinically improving but X-ray may still have persisting changes, consider arranging a further X-ray 6 to 8 weeks. Now, these are all off-label. So, full pulmonary function testing, walk test with assessment of oxygen, echocardiogram, and all those things need to be done on from case to case basis. Role of PFT is extremely important, and DLCO seems to be the most important part in this. And there's one study which came in Elsevier journal that higher level of D dimer on admission could effectively predict impaired diffusion capacity after 3 months of discharge. So CRP and D dimer continue to be the most important markers. Now the 6-minute walk test, in our experience at the PSRI hospital, has been the most useful test in assessing these patients, which actually make me think whether I should do a CT scan or not do a CT scan. There could be hundreds of causes of shortness of breath on exertion. The vital capacity is also a effort-dependent parameter. However, if the patient desaturates significantly on 6-minute walk test, then I think that his lungs are affected, and then I go for a CT scan and treatment. So who should undergo a CT scan if there is a worsening respiratory symptoms? If the patient clinically suspect moderate to severe COVID infection with negative results and subtle non-specific finding on the initial CT scan, and the patient who have had a severe disease and are complaining of difficulty in breathing or persistent cough, and if you are not able, they do not respond to the usual treatment, there should be low threshold for doing a CT scan. Now, I'm not going to talk about pharmacotherapy today because this I had covered during one of my presentations, where nintedanib and pirfenidone are the two drugs besides steroids which can be used. So far, there are no studies and no head-to-head trials to show whether the nintedanib or pirfenidone work or do not work. There is no time to go into that part. So how do we manage long COVID? There are various facets of it. You have to go into the full history, the current symptoms, nature and severity. You have to look at the temperature, heart rate, blood pressure, respiratory examination, functional status, pulse oximetry and clinical testing. Assess for the comorbidities and social and financial circumstances when indicated. You have to do a full blood count, liver and renal function test. To my mind, D-dimer and CRP. These are the two important parameters which makes me feel that further evaluation is required. Worsening breathlessness, if the PaO2 is less than 96, unexplained chest pain, new confusion, focal weakness. These are the things which are sinister things which should, and of course you have to manage comorbidities, and social and cultural well-being is equally important. So the medical management is symptomatic, paracetamol, optimizing control, listening and empathy, consider antibiotics if you are sure that you are dealing with an infection. Self-management, including the daily oximetry and so on and so forth, are also very important rehabilitation has a great role to play. I would say that do not depend on too many of medications or pharmacotherapy. You should more depend upon the lifestyle modification. Now I come to the second part of my presentation, that is mutations and variants, which are actually boggling us, troubling us, and scaring us. And the expert on this is, of course, Dr. Sanjay Rai. But I would be just giving you an introduction of it. What are mutations and what is variant? Viruses with mutations become variants. Mutation is a technical term when there is an alteration in the protein structure of the RNA in the COVID virus. If the variant displayed different physical properties, the original virus, then we call it a strain. Then we say it is a different strain. So mutation is the alteration in protein, and then it is called variant. And if it has some clinical properties in terms of increased contagiousness or different clinical profile, as we are saying, then we call it a new strain. And depending upon where the changes are located in the virus, they may affect the virus properties and which may cause transmissibility as well as severity. This is a beautiful picture of what is called as electrotomography, cryo-ET as it is called. I know very little about it. So why variants are important? Variants are important because their contagiousness and severity of illness may be different. A person infected with COVID may not be immune to variants, and there may be different potential for second infection. A vaccinated person may not be immune to the variant. A person may think that he has had infection or he has had effective vaccine, has formed antibodies as tested by the laboratory, but these antibodies may not be useful for this variant or mutant strain. So there are, how do you classify variants? There are three types of variants: variants of interest, variants of concern, and variants of high consequences. Now, this classification obviously would be arbitrary. The possible attributes of variant of interest is specific genetic markers that are predicted to affect the transmission, diagnostics, therapeutics, as well as immune escapism, evidence that demonstrates it is the cause of an increase in proportion of cases or unique outbreak in clusters, as we are seeing in Maharashtra, as well as in Delhi and other parts of India, and limited prevalence of or expansion globally. Where are we now? Some variants are specific to certain regions, including one found in the Bangalore. There's a B117 variant currently dominates in new cases in Punjab, that is UK strain. And what are the different variant of concern in COVID-19? B117, it was initially detected in the UK. There's a 50% increase in the transmission, likely increase in the severity. There was a recent paper on the 1st of April in Journal of American Medical Association where involving 55,000 and 1 lakh cases, which showed that mortality due to UK virus was, if at all, was more than Wuhan virus. So initial impression that UK virus is more contagious but less lethal is not correct as found in the studies, and it has a minimal impact on neutralization by convalescent plasma or vaccinated sera. That's a good news, that our vaccinated person will still be protected against B117 virus. B1351 was initially detected in South Africa in December 2020. It has a moderate reduction of neutralization by convalescent plasma and vaccinant sera. So South African strain is little dangerous strain. Now P1 was initially defined travelers from Brazil. Now this strain has reduced neutralization by convalescent or post-vaccinated sera. So vaccinated person will have actually no protection against Brazilian strain. So what are the variants of high consequence? Possible attributes of variant of high consequences are impact demonstrated on failure of diagnostic, your diagnostic machinery may fail. Evidence to suggest a significant reduction in vaccine effectiveness, significantly reduce susceptibility to multiple emergence of authorization or approved therapeutics, more severe clinical disease and increased hospitalization. So what are these variants of high consequence? That is to be found out. And how are they dangerous? These variants seem to spread more easily and quickly. An increase in the number of cases will put more strain on healthcare resources, lead to more hospitalization and potentially more deaths, as we are seeing now. Studies suggest that antibodies generated through vaccine with currently authorized vaccine recognize these variants majority of time. And this is being closely investigated and more studies are underway. Now, Johnson & Johnson vaccine had 57% efficacy against South African vaccine. This variant is prevalent versus 72% that the variant that is in US. Novavax vaccine had 49% efficacy against South African versus 90% efficacy against UK strain. The results may have some uncertainty that they were based on the low number of cases in South Africa. And B135 variant may have a higher chance of reinfecting patients who were infected earlier with Wuhan virus. So this could be scary. The people who have had COVID once could be infected with another variant or another strain, as may be called. The good news is that ChAdOx1, that is Astra vaccine or Covishield vaccine, this particular study by Catherine showed that efficacy of Astra vaccine against the UK variant is similar to that of the Wuhan strain. So far the news is good as far as the UK strain is concerned, but we have to see. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your kind attention. I have tried to explain what I know about mutations, and I'll be happy to indulge into discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Khilnani, for a very, very excellent presentation on long COVID and the different mutants of coronavirus. I now invite Dr. Sanjay K. Roy for his talk on current status of vaccines and few aspects of COVID variants also. Dr. Sanjay Roy is Professor, Center of Community Medicine, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi. He has to his credit over 150 publications and is a regular reviewer of many major national and international journals. He has been involved in more than 30 research projects. He received many awards and honors like Dr. J.E. Park Memorial Oration. He received fellowship of IPHA. He is a member of many technical groups, the Government of India, ICMR and INCLIN. He is working in the area of HIV AIDS and providing technical support to NACO, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. He is a member of many technical research groups of NACO. Professor Rai is also a focal person for HIV surveillance at AIIMS New Delhi. His other areas of interest are immunization, health system, and communicable diseases. He is currently a national president of Indian Public Health Association. I invite Dr. Sanjay Roy for his talk.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Girish, and thank you very much. And good evening, everybody. Dr. J.C. Khilnani, Dr. K.K. Parikh, Dr. Girish Mathur, Dr. Padut Sharma, my other colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to share this special occasion with all of you. I shall be discussing here the some aspect of COVID vaccination and mutations, although Dr. Khilani has already discussed about the mutation, but I will try to cover only the available evidences, scientific evidences. So this is the old slide, and we know that a very small virus originated in almost 1 year ago, and within 3 months of its origin, almost covered more than 200 countries within 3 months of its origin. As per the reported cases, this world has reported more than 137 million cases and more than 2.9 million deaths as on today. So entire world is crippling, and this India is also with along with all of other part of this world is crippling. India has already reported more than 30.6 million cases and more than 1.7 lakh deaths. And these are the reported numbers. The actual number of cases and deaths could be many times higher than these reported cases. So everybody is asking this question, what is the solution? Is there end of this type of pandemic? And the answer is always yes. Yes, how? So that is through herd immunity. Then in past also we had several pandemics and we had controlled through herd immunity, or we also call the population immunity. There is a misconception that herd immunity is a synonym of the natural infection. No, we achieve either herd immunity either through the natural infection or through this vaccination. So henceforth, I will talk about the vaccination only. We all know that vaccination is a very safe and effective way, and it's a smarter way to prevent the disease and save lives. There are more than 20 vaccines are already in use, and as per I estimate that every year we are saving more than 3 million lives. So more than 30 lakhs lives we are saving every year through various vaccines. For this COVID-19 also against this SARS coronavirus 2, we have a few vaccines to make a dent on this coronavirus progression. So this is the current status as per the latest WHO data. There are more than 273 vaccines are in the different phases of the development. Currently, 87 are in the clinical phase and 186 are in the preclinical phase of the development. 13 vaccines, they have various regulatory they have already approved for the as a emergency use authorization certificate they have got. So just I know you are aware about, but just to refresh your memories, these are the various phases of any clinical trial, and all these vaccines have passed all these phases. So why I'm sharing this, there are a lot of confusion because of the concern about the safety, efficacy of the data. So preclinical, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4 clinical trials. So currently for many vaccines, we are in the phase 4 trial, that is the post-marketing trial. Usually in the phase 1, the numbers are very small, less than 100. But in our country, like this Bharat Biotech vaccine, the numbers were more than 375 people were recruited in the phase 1 trial, and phase 2, phase 3, more than 25,000 in phase 3. These are the various platforms the researchers are using to develop vaccine against SARS coronavirus 2. Currently, these are the platform in the various stages of the clinical stages, like inactivated vaccine, live attenuated vaccine, and this nucleic acid vaccine, both messenger RNA and DNA, non-replicating vector vaccines, subunit vaccine, virus-like particle vaccines. So in researchers are using this platform for development of vaccine. So majority of these are the clinical trial, all 87. They are the protein subunit vaccine, followed by viral replicating, non-replicating, that is like your AstraZeneca vaccine, Serum Institute vaccine, or other inactivated, or Bharat Biotech vaccine is inactivated vaccine. So these are but majority are in the clinical phase, they are the subunit vaccine. Majority of doses for all these vaccines, those who are in the clinical phase, clinical trial phase, all in the 87, almost majority are 2-dose vaccine at 4 week apart, followed by 3 week apart, and almost 50% are single dose vaccine. These are the 13 vaccine approved by the various regulatory agency. 2 are messenger RNA, Pfizer and Moderna. 5 are your this inactivated. 3 from China, 1 from India, that is Bharat Biotech, and 1 from your Russia. And then your 5 are also this non-replicating viral vector, or your recombinant, we also call recombinant vaccine. So this 1 from AstraZeneca, Serum Institute is manufacturing that. The brand name is Covishield. 2 from China, 1 from Russia. So these are the 5 vaccine, and 1 is peptide vaccine. So altogether, these are the 13 vaccine approved by the various regulatory authority, and various countries, they are using these 13 vaccines. These are the 13 vaccines. The vaccine status in India. So government of India has approved 3 vaccine, and the first one is Covaxin, which is a whole virion inactivated. So it's the same virus, killed virus, and the platform is inactivated, the whole virion. And this is a completely indigenous vaccine developed by virus isolation was done by ICMR, National Institute of Virology, Pune, and with the help of Bharat Biotech, they developed vaccine. All the clinical phases, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials done in India. And government of India has already approved. The interim analysis has shown that the efficacy is 81%. Then the this Zydus Cadila, AstraZeneca vaccine, Oxford vaccine. This one is in India. The Serum Institute is manufacturing this. The Lancet, and the overall efficacy with 2 standard dose at 4 week apart is 60.1. Actually, as per the pooled analysis, it's a 70% in few subjects in UK trial. Half dose has been given, and the efficacy in that group was more, almost 90%. So the pooled analysis showed the result efficacy as 70%, but with 2 standard dose and 2 week apart, and they have already published in Lancet. So I'm here talking about the published literature. Covaxin, they have not published it. It's based on their press release. Sputnik, non-replicating viral vector, the difference between these two, like AstraZeneca, they are using adenovirus, chimpanzee adenovirus, whereas this Sputnik Russian vaccine, they are using human adenovirus. Government of India just approved 2 days ago, and the efficacy is 91.6. They are published in the Lancet also, this in peer-reviewed journal, and most probably by June, supply will start. One problem with this Sputnik is they require -20 for storage and transportation temperature. So they have 2 formulation. One is your dried, freeze-dried that require, and the clinical trial has been done in that formulation. Then other vaccines in India. So there are altogether 8 vaccines, and very soon we'll have 3-4 more vaccine, like this Zydus Cadila vaccine, plasmid DNA vaccine. They are using this DNA technology platform, and already phase 1, phase 2 is almost over. Phase 3 trial is going on, and most probably by August they will finish this phase 3 clinical trial. This is also a completely indigenous vaccine. So these 2 vaccine, one by Bharat Biotech and one by this Zydus Cadila, is a completely indigenous vaccine. Then biological E vaccine, this is a subunit vaccine. and phase 2, phase 1/2 clinical trial is going on. Phase 3, this DCGI has already approved for the phase 3 clinical trial. Then one messenger RNA vaccine also, this is phase 1, phase 2 clinical trial is going on. Then one nasal vaccine, phase 1, phase 2 almost completed. Phase 2 recruitment is over. So very soon they will start phase 3 trial also. And then this Covovax, Serum Institute is also in the partnership with Novavax. So phase 2 by phase 3 clinical trial is going on. So this is the current status. Now I have compared the efficacy of few vaccines like Moderna 94.1%, Pfizer 95%, Oxford AstraZeneca 62.1%, Sputnik 91.6%, this Epivac 100%. They have shown ICMR 81%. So these are the various vaccines currently in the use, and these are the various efficacy. This is the current status. In India, vaccination started on 16th January, and one of the largest vaccination drive. Till date, we have covered more than 10 crore, almost 11. We have now, today we have crossed 11 crore. So 11 crore vaccinated, one dose. This is about the total vaccine given all over the world. The United States is #1, followed by China, and in terms of total number of doses, India is #3. But in terms of percentage of people got vaccinated, India is not in the first 15. Israel is #4, almost 61.5% of the targeted people, they have received this vaccine, followed by UK and Chile. So already Dr. Khilani has discussed, and in the introduction also Dr. Parikh discussed about the vaccine hesitancy. So definitely there was a vaccine hesitancy initially, mainly for the safety and efficacy related issue, and mainly because of the misinformation. But gradually now it's not, vaccine hesitancy is not a major issue, at least in current time. So I'll not discuss this. So who should be vaccinated? Who are eligible? So any person above 18 years of age who are at the risk of getting the infection, except pregnant and lactating women, so they are eligible. So really in current scenario, in our country, like in US, it's a 16 year and above, but in our country, the absolute contraindication is less than 18 years, pregnancy and lactating women currently with these two vaccines. There is a scientific basis. Now there are a lot of hue and cry about the why we are vaccinating only above 45, and it's a scientific basis. The vaccine should be first given to those who are at the greater risk of getting either infection or greater risk of severity or dying. So the government of India prioritize this vaccination program for healthcare provider and frontline worker. They are at the greater risk of getting infection, and those who are with the comorbid condition are above 60 first, and then 45 with the comorbid condition, then 45, and gradually they are decreasing. So there is a scientific basis of this type of prioritization. Now there is a lot of discussion, confusion regarding should we vaccinate people who had COVID in the past. Answer could be yes, no. So we'll discuss this. I will show some evidences. Then the scientific knowledge about this. Now this virus is 1 year old, and we have lot of evidences. We have generated lot of evidences, and I believe this is the only disease in 1 year time we have lot of publication, almost bombarded on publication. We can say pandemic of publications. So we have sufficient knowledge about this. We have not the complete knowledge about this. Why still we don't have, but now we have some knowledge and we should use this. The problem is even today we are not using the evidences. We are only speculating. We have a lot of evidences even for the control program for this contact tracing, etc. We have generated a lot of evidence, but somehow we are not using. Still, we are using all the evidences, old evidences when we started this program. Other is children. Concern, many scientists have raised concern about the children. Again, for this COVID-19 disease, whatever evidence we have globally, in children, it's not a very serious disease. It's a very mild disease in children. In India, per day, almost 2,200 children are dying because of malnutrition. We will not find 22 children dying with COVID. So it's a issue. Somebody say, okay, they are not at risk of dying, but they can become a carrier. So if we are vaccinating our elderly and others, so chances of transmission would be less. But we don't have any safety data on children. We don't have any efficacy data in children. Plus, in children, it's not a very severe disease. So we can discuss this during discussion time. These three variants of concern, Dr. G.C. Khilani has already highlighted. Like UK variant, this mutation associated with increased transmissibility. There is a conflicted evidence about the early reports suggested that there is no evidence that this virus is have any impact on the severity. But now few studies have demonstrated that no, the severity is more than the original one virus. And Dr. Khilani has already highlighted, so I'm not going to. And they have one article published in New England Journal of Medicine a few days ago, almost in the last week of this either March or first week of April, about this Oxford vaccine found to have efficacy against this virus, and they found that it's not effective. Then the South African variant, Dr. Khilani rightly mentioned that the chances of reinfection with this is very high. Whatever evidence we have, so possibility of reinfection is there among the recovered patient with the older strain, and they may evade our bypass our cellular immunity also. And sorry, I say about this UK variant, I'm extremely sorry. The Oxford vaccine and Covaxin found to be efficacious against these variants, though both Oxford they have published and Bharat Biotech have already published that this vaccine is effective against UK variant. But for South African variant, I was talking about this South African variant earlier. So this South African variant, they have not found any effect on this of this AstraZeneca vaccine, Oxford vaccine. Actually, they returned all the supplied doses to Serum Institute of India and a few days ago. So whatever evidence we have, possibility of reinfection is there, and also they are bypassing the existing immunity against vaccines. The Brazilian variant is also, Dr. Khilani has already highlighted this, and this is also a variant of some concern, possibly chances of reinfection with this variant is also there. So there are some evidences that this virus is reinfecting with if a person had exposure with the older variant. That is one variant. So some mutation in India, this consortium of genomics, they released data almost 2 weeks ago that they tested more than 10,000 samples for this to detect mutations, and they found 771 variant of concern. And out of this, 95%, 736 were this UK variant, and then followed by your South African variant, 4.4%. And this Brazilian variant was less than 1%. And these samples with these variant of concern have been identified in the 18 states of the country, but in Mumbai and in Punjab, this UK variant is predominant variant. So in India also we have found 2-3 variant. There are a lot of mutations, but variant of concerns, these two are in India. This mutation B1617 mutation, 20% estimated case in Maharashtra, and now we believe that most probably this is also very contagious. A new trend has been observed in current year, that secondary attack rate is very high. So earlier we thought that this basic reproduction rate is around R naught is around 2, somewhere between 2 to 3. And now with increased number of cases here, and this happened in US also, now there is this is time to recalculate this or not. And because of this high secondary, almost all family members are getting infection. This is a new trend this time. So it should be around 50, somewhere 5 to 6. Now it looks like, if it's so, then this 50 to 60% immunity would not be sufficient for the herd immunity. Then if suppose if R naught is 4 or 5, then you require 80 to 90% protection to develop a herd immunity. And another is this genome variation, which is in Kerala, Andhra Pradesh, and Telangana. And this they also invade the neutralizing, so they are capable of invading. So reinfection, I can say, may be seen with the South African and Brazilian variant. Although the chances are very less, but these two are, there are a lot of cases reported from. So natural immunity, whatever evidence we have, now we have almost 50 publications related to natural immunity and existing evidence. One article published in New England Journal of Medicine, they followed up more than 12,000 healthcare workers for 31 weeks in UK, and they found that out of this 12,000, around 1,200 had antibodies at baseline. Actually, 1,177 had antibodies and baseline, any level of antibodies. It's not that neutralizing antibodies. And after 31 weeks, they found only 2 out of 1,200 become seropositive. None developed any breakthrough infection. So if is symptomatic, almost 100% effective, but infection 2 develops, so more than 95% if you calculate the efficacy, considering those who had this antibodies at the baseline. So we can calculate the efficacy and having this. One study published a few days ago in Lancet, this Denmark study, the overall protection with repeat infection, they have found that 80%, but in elderly people above 65 years, this observed protection was less, only 47.1%. So no difference in estimated protection against the repeat infection by either by sex or by age more than, less than 65 years. So the way forward is, no doubt, vaccine is a safe and effective and clever way to control the pandemic. And now the answer is as soon as possible. If you can vaccinate large number of population, then we can achieve this herd immunity early. During the COVID-19 pandemic, vaccination continued to be critically important. Continuation of the largest vaccination drive in India, almost more than 10 crore India has already vaccinated daily, if you see the data, 30 to 40 lakh per day, sometimes even more than 40 lakh. But there is a mismatch in the global your demand and supply, especially in the third world country and other developing countries. They are facing acute shortage of this vaccine. And I will appreciate our vaccine diplomacy policy. India has already supplied to more than 70 countries with more than 58 million doses. 8 millions are free, and they have given 60.5 million they have given to COVAX, and 35 million doses they have with the commercial deal. So already we have supplied to more than 70 countries. And we have won the praise from the entire world about this vaccine diplomacy policy. Um, uh, so because of this mismatch even in our country, so and currently no doubt it's a very precious commodity, vaccine is a, so we must use judiciously. Um, uh, as per the evidence and available evidences, those who had COVID infection should not be part of the priority group at least this time. We may argue that after natural infection, a vaccine may act as a booster, but we don't have any evidence that this will act as a booster. Even after natural infection, current time, you must be aware there are natural infection, vaccination, and there are few reinfections. So we don't have sufficient evidence of that, but we have whatever evidence we have that a natural infection is protecting with the same extent for a longer duration of time, and the overall protection is better. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sanjay Rai, for a very magnificent and comprehensive presentation on vaccines available in India. Now we will have some questions to the experts, and then the house will be open for discussion. My first question is Dr. Khilnani, sir.
Yes.
Sir, what are, in your opinion, what are the reasons for recent resurgence of COVID-19 cases in India? I think you must have answered this question so many times in so many forums.
Unsuccessfully though, but but I can recite my previous presentation not only here but on television also, and the newspaper also, that I always thought that we were sitting on a time bomb. This is because that epidemiology of which Dr. Sanjay Rai is an expert, we still had and we still have a large susceptible population. The Zero survey of Delhi, 56%, didn't impress me at all, because Delhi has a floating population. And India being a diverse country, there are metro cities which hit the headline, but there are two-tier cities, and there are districts, and there are towns, and there are villages. So we had a large population. That is one. And second is because of, by 1 year, or people really got tired of COVID appropriate behavior. They were actually fatigued of sitting at home. There are two things. One were the poor people who had to work to earn their bread, for their living. And there's a strata of people who were fond of traveling, going to destinations and enjoying their holidays. In my clinical experience, three types of activities led to cases, and I'm sure my senior colleagues would have. One was one who were traveling out of town or out of country. Second were the marriage parties, and third were the private parties. And I was almost in the 90% of cases, we were able to trace as to where they actually got it. I have not gone out of Delhi for last 14 months. So if I talk about Delhi, so even after Diwali, the markets are full, the roads are full, the restaurants, eating started. Now here I would like to emphasize the scientific part of it. 60% of the transmission occurs by asymptomatic or mild symptomatic people. That is one. Second is that in 50, this is a study when in 15 states in United States, where each state has a different rule, when the mask was mandated, that means by law they had to use the mask, there was reduction in estimated number of cases by 2 lakhs. When they banned in-house dining in 4 states and state of Colombia, there was definite reduction in number of cases and the mortality. This is the published, these are the published studies. So therefore, I think the reason for Indian upsurge was large number of susceptible population, absolute complacency on the part of the public, lack of rules as to for the COVID appropriate behavior, and we are in a mess. And also, of course, some role of mutants, which we have very little evidence so far, but it's generating. Like Punjab has 81% UK strain and so on and so forth. But that couldn't be the only reason. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. My second question, sir. After 1 year of vast clinical experience of yours of treating COVID-19 patients, what treatment protocols you suggest for mild to moderate COVID-19 infection?
Well, that's a very difficult question because I right from the beginning I was never proponent of hydroxychloroquine or for the ivermectin. These two are the one. I would put it that all mild cases should be stratified into high risk or low risk, and this is based on the factors known to us, starting from age to hypertension to diabetes to coronary heart disease to rheumatic diseases and smoking status, COPD, history of malignancy, and those in the high risk case should be kept under close surveillance. And this surveillance is not only clinical. I'll talk about my practice, which is off label. All these patients, I subject them to CBC, CRP, and D-dimer and ferritin every third day, starting from the 4th or 5th day of their illness. As the CRP goes above 20, I start them on steroids. I still have a low threshold for starting remdesivir in a susceptible population. Like if I have a patient who has got interstitial lung disease and he is on azathioprine and corticosteroid, which is the standard care for NSIP and other types of ILDs, even if they do not have increased oxygen requirement, I used to admit them and give them remdesivir. I still do that, although that is in the shortage. I do not think the ivermectin does anything to change the progress of the disease, and there's a scientific evidence. There's a large trial which has shown that ivermectin does not help. Of course, the hydroxychloroquine is dumped completely. We do not know what is the role of azithromycin or doxycycline for that matter as an immunomodulator. But the main thing is finding out the risk factors, monitoring them closely, starting corticosteroids at the right time, and concomitantly giving antiviral drug. To my mind, remdesivir is the only antiviral drug which has benefit. Thank you.
So for OPD patient, you don't have anything.
No, okay. I I have to talk science and what I do. And if you ask me, do I write ivermectin? I do write ivermectin because I could be questioned कि आपको आता कुछ नहीं, आपको ये दवाई भी नहीं आती, क्योंकि वो तो by the time actually they come to me, they are already on ivermectin, doxycycline, azithromycin. And if you permit me to share my experience, there are a whole lot of cases who have tremendous side effects of these drugs by the time they come to me. Gastrointestinal, diarrheas, epigastric pain, nausea, because they have received loads of drugs before for that, for which there is no basis. And if you ask me what I do, before the COVID is diagnosed or even somebody has fever or upper respiratory tract, I do start them with azithromycin. That is the standard drug that I use. And as they are diagnosed COVID, and if they fall into the low risk group, I do give them ivermectin only for 3 days, so that I should not be questioned that you don't know this drug. Besides this, I do not use favipiravir. That is my personal, because I don't find any evidence for that benefit, and taking 9 tablets morning, 9 tablets evening causes more side effects than effect. Thank you.
So you said steroids are given when CRP is more than 20. But if oxygen saturation is normal, do you still recommend steroids at this stage?
Yes, I still feel that steroids should be given. Even by the time a person with a normal lung desaturated, it becomes too late. That means disease has gone very severe. You have to preempt it. And I preempted by, as I said, first finding out the risk factors, that is susceptible population. Now I'll give you an example. Suppose the patient has got a COVID infection, you do a CT, which is routine now. He has a score of 12 by 25. His oxygen is 96%. He is not desaturating, and his CRP is 36. I'm not going to wait for oxygen to drop, or whatever the guideline we may say. And so I'm repeating it. If the person has pneumonia, which 95% of the people have on CT scan, especially if they have inflammatory markers which is high, and my marker is most important marker remains CRP, then I do. But as I said during my last presentation, I do not believe in more the merry. People are using 1 gram of Solimedrol or 40 milligrams 3 times a day. I still believe in recovery trial that 8 milligram of dexamethasone or equivalent to 32 milligram of methylprednisolone or 40 milligram of prednisolone is good enough. If you give more dosages, more quantity of steroids, you are causing more harm than good.
Sir, may
Sir, 1 minute, sir. Dexamethasone, sir, what dose you give and for how many days and how many divided doses? Dexamethasone.
I said, sir, 8 milligram as it was used in the recovery trial. I give it for a period of 7 to 14 days. Now, further steroids will depend upon case to case.
8 milligram in a divided dose?
Not necessarily. Steroids we don't give in divided doses. It can be given in one dose, but sometimes we do give.
No, the home, when a patient is getting treated at home,
Yeah,
8 milligram you will prefer to give at one shot or in a 2, 3, 4 dose?
it doesn't
home, we
matter.
don't
I
give
said,
injections.
sir, I said it doesn't matter.
Oral
You
doses.
give once or twice, it doesn't matter. Steroids.
Thank you, sir.
So may I ask a question? What is the experience of you all esteemed doctors regarding the use of?
Dr. Sanjeev,
Yes.
we will first take few questions, then house will be open for discussion.
Oh,
Please
sorry,
can you
sorry,
wait for
sir.
some time? Yeah, please.
Sorry,
Huh?
sir. Sorry.
Dr. Sanjay, you talked about various variants. So can the RT-PCR test miss the mutants of COVID-19 virus and test is negative if the person is infected with the variants?
See, although RT-PCR is a gold standard and it recognizes SARS-CoV-2, so whatever evidence we have, they are recognizing even the mutant variant also. They are not recognizing the type of variant, but SARS-CoV-2. So all these are SARS-CoV-2. So they are recognizing even the overall sensitivity of this RT-PCR is low if you compare with other gold standard for different diseases. It's around 70% the overall sensitivity. So since still we are losing almost 30% of the total estimated cases, positive cases. So then as per the available evidence, we can say, yeah, they are detecting.
Okay. My second question to you, Dr. Rai. What about the controversy about clotting disorder with thrombocytopenia secondary to Covishield, especially in view of the two recent articles published in New England Journal of Medicine on 9th April only?
See, there are few evidences, and that's why in majority of the European countries, they have allowed only restricted use. They are using only in the elderly population, not in the young population. So now we have few evidences of this. Almost, if you see France, Germany, all these countries, they are not using in the young population. Some are using in the above 50, some are using in the above 60, some are using in the above 65, but none of these countries are using in the young population. So we have some evidence, no doubt we have some evidence. But although WHO has said, the Oxford AstraZeneca, they have said that there is no any evidence. Dr. Khilani can also throw some light on this, that what are the evidences available for this clotting. But I can say that at least we have some evidence that in few cases is causing problem. Dr. Khilani, sir.
I totally agree with you. And but my take is, as you said, 11 crore dosages have been given, out of which I think 85 to 90% are Covishield. The sheer quantum of this speaks for the safety of this Covishield vaccine. Anecdotal adverse effects are there.
Thank you, sir. If a person gets first dose of vaccine, then it gets in COVID-19 infected, so at what interval you suggest a second dose of vaccine, sir?
As per Government of India guidelines, after recovery, 2 weeks after the recovery, that person can take the second dose. So this is the guidelines. But I don't think that that person require a second dose.
So he can skip the second dose?
That can be. We don't have any evidence that second dose will provide any benefit. At least we don't have any evidence.
Okay, so how long the immunity lasts for COVID-19 infection, and how severe is the disease in cases of reinfection?
So now there are few reinfection reported cases. Earlier we thought that it's a very rare of rarest event, even not 1%. But now, because of these variants all over world, there are few reinfection cases they have reported. The immunity with the same virus, whatever we have, I can say, like one study I mentioned in my presentation, which was published in New England Journal of Medicine, this Oxford University, that up to 31 weeks, at least they are protected with almost 100% with the any symptomatic case, and more than 95% with the infection. Even what they did, they tested after at the gap of 2 weeks RT-PCR in both the group, and they found that only 2 out, and that was a huge number. See, if you compare with any clinical trial like Pfizer data, how they calculated efficacy, or Bharat Biotech data, or this like 47, after 47 events, that is events cases of COVID cases, they unblinded and they found that 7 were in the vaccine group in Bharat Biotech, and remaining were in the placebo group. Pfizer, they after 95 they did interim analysis, and they unblinded, they found that 5 were in the vaccine group out of these 95, and 90 were in the your placebo group, and they calculated efficacy. So this efficacy is against the symptomatics, because the follow-up is, this is not against the infection. all these efficacy for all these virus, the vaccines are against the symptoms. So this is the way we do follow up during vaccine trial, that at a regular interval, we ask our participants, do you have any symptoms? And if the person is having symptoms, then we test, and then after a certain number, we unblind this. So the efficacy of natural infection with the same strain till 7 months of time, it's almost 100%. With whatever evidence for symptomatic. For asymptomatic, it's almost 90-95%.
Thank you, Dr. Rai. I invite Dr. K.K. Parikh sir for his comments or any queries. Sir, please unmute yourself. Please unmute yourself.
I would like to, in my hospital, he had a COVID infection 4 months back. He has already received 2 doses of vaccination, and it is almost 1.5 months after the second dose. Now today, he had some rhinitis and some cough, and he got his RT-PCR done. And unfortunately, it was positive. So what do you advise, whether he should be isolated, he should not mix with the family, or should he be given treatment? What are the incidences of such infections in spite? Because you said even COVID infection provides the best immunity.
So, sir, you have actually hit the nail, as would be expected. Unofficially, there were 35 doctors from Gangaram Hospital and other hospitals also. Large number of healthcare workers who had 2 doses of vaccination, and I am personally aware of several cases who have developed. So the vaccine efficacy is not 100%, and if we talk about Covishield vaccine, as Dr. Sanjay has already outlined, it is 61%, or pooled data says 71%. But I want to bring it another issue. Other which Astra has already published this data, that for severe infections, for life-threatening infection, that efficacy is close to 100%. That means if the vaccinated persons get infection, this is likely to be asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic. So, sir, in the case that you are citing, of course he should be treated, but he has the potential to transmit, and that's a threat actually. As I said, that 60% of the transmission all over the world is because of asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic, and vaccinated people are likely to have mildly symptomatic or asymptomatic disease. They are more likely to transmission. Now, it is also said that these people have a transmission potential which is little lower than the usual person, of which no solid evidence is there. So therefore, answering your question, sir, this patient should be treated and kept under isolation as any other case. That's my answer to that, sir. Sir, you have to unmute yourself.
Please unmute, sir.
Most important thing that almost it is more common in our clinicians and physicians and doctors, that we, after the vaccination, we get antibodies tested. And it depends upon if the level is high, we feel very safe. If it is low, we feel that we have got a sleepless night, bahut kam aayi. So is there any need for antibodies, and does it matter if you have got a high titer and you have got a low titer, and how much time it takes to develop?
I would like Dr. Sanjay Rai to throw light on this.
Yes, sir.
Okay, sir, thank you. Actually, this neutralizing antibody concept usually in this this clinical trial just to monitor the inoculated group. Usually a 4-time rise from the baseline. If suppose baseline is 0, then the reference value for the negative, like suppose if less than 1 we consider as negative test, then 1 is will consider as a baseline, and 4 times increase. is considered as a presence of neutralizing antibodies. But this immune system is a complex mechanism. It's through this antibody measurement, titer measurement, it's a humoral response. This cellular response, cellular immunity also play an important role, and almost all vaccines, they are in the use, like COVID in India, these two vaccines, they have demonstrated that they are also producing cellular immunity. So it's evidence, like I was talking about that article in the New England Journal of Medicine article. Any level of antibodies, they followed up for 7 months. So it's not only antibodies. After some time, suppose if you are not exposed to antigen, then there will be definitely decline. Suppose if I got a natural infection and I'm using all these preventive measures, so I will not get a second chance. Suppose if I'm not getting a second chance of exposure, then after some time, at 6 months, 7 months, definitely there will be a decline of the IgG level. But that does not mean that you are not protected with that variant. If suppose if you are exposed to the same antigen, so the science, since our usage days, we are reading that, vaccine also work on the same principle, that you have the immunological memory, your cellular immunity is there. So whenever the new virus or new antigen will come in contact, then that cellular immunity will activate your immune system, and you will produce antibodies, and that will neutralize that antigen. So this is the concept. So that time your antigen level will be high. So it's not only your antibodies. Yeah, definitely in few cases antibodies are almost nil in few cases, but that does not mean that you are not protected. I cannot say that you are not protected.
So it's a clear-cut message that there is no need of getting antibodies titer to be done, because it gives a false message and it confuses you.
Yeah, you are right,
Okay.
sir.
Okay. Can vaccine can a COVID vaccine can give you RT-PCR positive, sir, after vaccination? No.
No, sir, none of these vaccines are live vaccine. A live vaccine can give if you are immunocompromised. So none of these vaccines are live vaccine.
That's right,
There
sir.
are 30 vaccines all over the world we are using, and none of them are live vaccine. So no. Answer is
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Dr. Pradyuman?
Yes, sir.
Yes. You
So,
got a
sir, there's a one word is a vaccine switch. Like there is a trial by MRHA in UK that after the Pfizer they have given AstraZeneca, or after giving an AstraZeneca they have done with the Moderna, and they're switching with the vaccine. So it being in India, you have taken a 2 doses of Covishield. Now the immunity comes to around 60%, close to. So at this stage, do you wish can a Sputnik a third dose, maybe at a later stage, 3 months or 2 months, can boost the immunity to another jump to 90%? This could be a vaccine switch. So such trials are to be required, because these vaccines they have not offered immunity beyond 60%. That's one point. Like in Moderna case or the Pfizer case, Bharat BioNTech, uh, they offer immunity around 95%. So, and number one, with the changing trend in mutation, as Dr. Ugar Sahi, he has commented that within 15 days, they can make a variation in a vaccine because messenger RNA technique, they are holding it. They can make a variation in 15 days time to the new coming mutants. That is one of the comment by Dr. Ugar Sahi. So vaccine switch and vaccine this mutants. So how do you comment, sir?
sir. There are many aspects. First, the evidence. We don't have any evidence that either is safety related or your efficacy related, that really efficacy will improve or not. All these are based on speculations or some hypotheses that they may work and they may act as a booster, and your immune system will respond to that. But we don't know what will happen with this type of vaccine if you are mixing two type of vaccine. So we don't have any data. So it's very difficult to say that what will happen for this mixing. Definitely they are doing clinical trial if they demonstrate that this is working. So after this, if they generate evidence, then we can use this. Till date, we don't have any evidence for this. What was your second question?
No, my second question was that there is a comment by Dr. Ugur Sahin. He commented that because he is the #1 in the world who has a mastered messenger RNA technique, because they are working for last more than 10 years on messenger RNA technique. And they have come, he says that within 15 days, if major mutations are done at spike protein, they can come out with a variation in the vaccine.
That can, sir, that can be done, no doubt. But see, no doubt the efficacy of vaccine is around 95%, but that is efficacy. If you see the effectiveness, we measure effectiveness when actual rollout occurs. We measure efficacy of any vaccine in a control situation during a research clinical trial. Like this vaccine require your minus 70, minus 80 degree for storage and transportation temperature. So in a country like India or many developing countries, if any time this cold chain breakage occur, then what will happen? This may go to zero also, overall efficacy.
Yes, true.
So overall feasibility and overall efficacy we can consider. But for our country, even though this messenger RNA vaccine, even this Sputnik, that this require minus 20 degree temperature for storage, and we have storage and transportation facility for 2 to 8 degree. All in routine immunization, we are using all the vaccines, and we are storing at 2 to 8 degrees centigrade. So we have capacity even at the sub PSC level, at the remote level we have, but we don't have capacity of minus 20 at the remote level. In big cities, metros, yeah, we have minus 70 also, but for entire country we don't have this type of facility. So feasibility is a great issue in this type, but that can be done anytime. They can change.
Your comment on intranasal vaccine, you have commented that there is a shortly India will have an intranasal vaccine from COVAX, Bharat Biotech. Dr. Krishna Allah has come up. Because intranasal vaccine will offer you IgA immunity also.
Yeah.
Normally, the vaccine offers you IgG blocking antibodies, but in intranasal vaccine, that will offer it additional local immunity, IgA immunity also. So, how do you take on message on this intranasal vaccine?
Yes, sir. It's in the clinical trial phase. So already they are in the clinical trial phase. Almost phase 2 trial recruitment is over. So they are going to start phase 3 trial, and definitely if they demonstrate that it's working well, if they demonstrate that it's working well, this nasal vaccine, then definitely that will be advantage. First, administration will be easy. Anybody, just like a polio vaccine, like even our ASA worker can give polio vaccine. Like in nowadays, somebody is talking about that we'll organize a camp. See, giving injection is not a very easy task. We require some level of training for giving injection. So ASA can't give injection, or anybody can't give either. At least ANM or above ANM level, a technician can give this injection. One, plus adverse event following immunization. There are chances of some adverse event. You can't manage this. So all these are in favor of this nasal vaccine, but we don't know the safety, we don't know the efficacy. So most probably this vaccine is safe. At least the phase 1 data has demonstrated, because they are entering phase 3. So it's one of the proxy indicator that if you are entering phase 3, that means phase 1 data has proved that the vaccine is safe and regulatory authority, if they are approving, that means it's safe. So safety, most probably they have demonstrated. I don't know the result, but most probably.
May I request the host to kindly able the chat so that the participants can type in their questions?
Yes, certainly, sir. We
Yes.
are now opening the discussion for the house. So all
Yes.
the participants are requested to please ask their queries, please one
Yes.
by one.
Dr. Khilani sir, Dr. Poddar this side.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, there is a small question. One person around 58 years old who was not vaccinated,
Mhm.
and was having fever 4 days back for 2 days below 101, and then fever was just persisted for 2 days, and in the meantime RT-PCR was done, which was negative. CBC, CRP D-dimer was also done on preventive side, and it was also normal, almost normal. But today, 5th, 6th day, he sudden had hypoxia, saturation 85%. Just 2 hours back, I got the news. So what could be the reason?
So the Dr. Sanjay Rai has already clarified this. The sensitivity of RT-PCR is about 70%. And there are so many factors, how the sample is taken, whether it is taken from the nasopharynx properly. But in the best of the hands, the sensitive, there's always a 30% chance that it is a falsely negative. So therefore, if this patient has developed hypoxia and otherwise there's no other reason for hypoxemia, then it is most likely that he has COVID infection, which has been missed on RT-PCR. So it should be repeated and then treated as COVID infection.
No, but sir, CBC, CRP, D-dimer, everything was normal also. Just 3 days,
So,
2 days.
yeah, that's right. But I just want to tell you that, of course, all of you know that first 4 to 5 days hypoxia does not occur. First 4 to 5 days, generally the markers would not rise. The music starts from 5th to 12th day, and that is well known, knowledge. But in medical science, there are so many variations. Some people become hypoxemic on 3rd day. The day of onset is not very clear. So, and none of the markers is absolute. That you could have a patient who is having hypoxemia with COVID positive, where CRP is not rising so much. D-dimer is most erratic. Sometimes the D-dimer goes into thousands while the patient is doing extremely well. So you have to take everything in totality. And I'm repeating, in today's pandemic time, if the patient has febrile illness, and if he has become hypoxemic, and if there's no other cause for hypoxemia, COVID is the diagnosis.
So what did we miss? What could have been done? CT scan? Because CRP, CBC was done 2 days back.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. Initially, we did not realize the value of CT, and we were speaking aloud, don't misuse CT, it causes radiation and blah, blah, blah. But then there were studies and we realized that sensitivity of CT scan was much more than the RT-PCR, and to the tune of 90 to 95%. So if the patient has fever and hypoxemia, straight away go for a HRCT scan. And if the HRCT scan shows the classical picture of ground glass opacity, the diagnosis is COVID.
No, sir, my question was before hypoxemia. In this case, ideally before, if everything was going normal, still CT would have been done on 5th day?
No, we don't do CT on before the hypoxemia develops. It's an odd case where, you have come on the wrong foot. That's not the standard of care.
That's right.
6 minutes walk was important in this case.
6-minute walk test, formal test is not done for COVID patients for obvious reasons. But we do ask these patients to walk in the room for a period of 3 to 6 minutes. If there's the drop in saturation by more than 3%, it is taken as significant hypoxia.
Okay, thank you.
What about bronchoalveolar lavage?
हो गया आपका? जी sir.
Bronchoalveolar lavage?
Bronchoalveolar lavage has more sensitivity than the throat swab and nasopharyngeal swab.
Ganga,
But it is not done routinely for the management of COVID patients, only in patients who are intubated or seriously ill where the diagnosis is not established, or you are thinking of an alternative diagnosis, then bronchoscopy is done. We must realize that it is a risk to the bronchoscopist also. As far as the aerosol generation is concerned, bronchoscopy has the maximum risk to the bronchoscopist even when you use the PP and whatever. So usual practice, the bronchoscopy is not done in patients for diagnosis of COVID. When you have atypical shadows and the RT-PCR is negative, then sometimes we do bronchoscopy to diagnose other diseases also. In the same setting, we send BAL for RT-PCR, which has a higher sensitivity than the throat swab.
Thank you.
Hello,
Thank you.
hello.
Sir.
May I ask a question for regarding
Yes, Dr.
vaccination?
Vijay? Yes.
Hello,
Dr.
Hello?
Vijay?
hello. May I ask a question?
Yes, yes.
Hello?
Sir, I have a question regarding vaccination. On some platform, the speaker are asking for go for CRP for vaccination if you have more than 60 years of age with comorbidity like CAD, CVD. And they are telling you if CRP is more than 1 or 2 something, 2 times, 3 times, you don't go for vaccination because of chances of clot in these vessels and chances of sudden cardiac death. It is valid or not? The explanation.
Dr. Sanjay is there?
सर आप इसको आंसर कर दीजिए.
No, this is not valid at all. Not at all valid. I know where it is coming from, but my answer is no.
Okay, sir.
There's
Thank you.
no
Sir.
need to do that. Yeah.
Sir, I am
May I
Dr.
ask-
Deepak Dal. Sir, one question from a surgeon side.
Okay.
Sir, I am a Dr. Deepak Dal from Mumbai, an orthopedic surgeon. So I just wanted a broad outlook, whether I am 60 plus 66 years with only hypertension. A question for all my colleagues and my friends and everybody must be listening here who are non-physician. Because in operation theater, we are maximum prone for even if there is a modular, whatever, the best of the OT. Shall we operate or we should avoid as far as possible as long as the corona is concerned?
You're asking me difficult. They are making your questions more and more difficult, I must say. So the thing is that life
No,
is.
sir, this is the only one thing. Even if the OT is with a laminar flow and a hi-fi OT, stainless steel, everything, but any orthopedic surgery, being an orthopedic surgeon, our surgery, any will last more than 1 hour because the draping and cleaning only takes a long time. So it will be 1 hour at least minimum. So as I got some idea when you show of the bronchoscopy, but here also they put a endotracheal tube or spinal whatever, and they keep a mask there. So I would like your expert opinion on this, sir.
If you can allow me, then I'll speak.
Yes, sir, please.
So the thing is that it depends upon what kind of surgery, how urgent it is, and of course you would do a COVID RT-PCR at least within 72 hours. That is one thing. In today's time, if you ask me today in city of Delhi or Mumbai or whatever, if there's a knee replacement which can wait for 2, 3, 6 months, it should be postponed. But otherwise, it's not an absolute contraindication to doing surgery. It depends upon the urgency of doing surgery that it should be taken. And of course, with due precautions, like if you have to do cesarean, you have to do cesarean, if it is indicated. But if you are doing a knee replacement which can wait for 6 months, 1 year, 3 months, I think during the surge, let me finish, sir. Wait a minute, yaar, bolne to do. So during the surge, today if you test 10 people in city of Delhi, maybe 2, 3 would be positive. So therefore, at this particular time, I would say the postponable surgeries should be avoided, be it orthopedic surgery or cholecystectomy or things like that. That's my personal take on this.
Sir, can I ask one question? Hello, can I ask one question? I'm Dr. Ranpise here from Pune. So as Remdesivir is going out of stock now, so what is the real indication for Remdesivir? Because people are giving you right, left, right, center just on admission. So is it only low flow oxygen or is it the CT severity score? What should be decided to give Remdesivir? Because we are losing Remdesivir quite a lot.
So if you are asking me my take on use of Remdesivir, I will not go by the guidelines. Since you have asked me a question, I'll tell you my take
Yes,
on, and I go based on the study which was published almost 6 months back. I think it was in JAMA or New England Journal of Medicine, where when the Remdesivir was given in patients with pneumonia without hypoxemia,
yeah,
it was shown that the duration of the illness was significantly reduced. It was also inferred that 5 days of Remdesivir was as good as 10 days of Remdesivir. So my take on Remdesivir is same as I said before. If the patient is high risk, and I need not recite all those things, patient has pneumonia on CT scan, patient has COVID positive, I would give him Remdesivir even before he develops hypoxemia. That's my personal take, and that's based on the evidence based. Now, based on that Remdesivir is approved by FDA, but Europeans have dumped it. I know, I am aware of that. None of the studies have shown mortality benefit as far as the Remdesivir is concerned. But I always feel that lack of evidence is not evidence to contrary. To prove mortality benefit in disease like COVID with the Remdesivir, you will need a very, very large study. And in the heterogeneous population, it's very difficult to prove. I cannot quote any experience of mine. It will not be right on my part. But I'll repeat. If the patient has got a high risk of severe disease because of his comorbidities and age or whatever, if he has pneumonia, he has COVID, I start Remdesivir early. I do not give steroids without giving antiviral drug, and to my mind, only antiviral drug is Remdesivir and not other. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, may I ask a question, sir? Hello.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, sir, this time the so-called second wave, we have come across the cases which rapidly progress to, lung involvement. After a few days, CRP is normal, D-dimers are normal, all the COVID panels are normal, but the patient is not of the BiPAP or high flow oxygen. Ultimately, patient leads into fibroptic lung. So, what is, sir, your experience regarding the use of antifibrotic drugs like nintedanib or perfenidol? Please share.
So you are starting a big Pandora box. We'll keep discussing till morning. I think this particular question is very difficult question to answer, but I'll answer in the wait a minute. एक मिनट यार, आपने पूछा है तो जवाब तो दे दो यार.
जी सर.
या तो आप ही बोलो तो फिर मैं फिर बाद में बोलता.
नहीं सर, please go ahead.
So the use of perfenidone and nintedanib is based on the fact that COVID also causes fibrosis, and both the drugs have been used for fibrotic lung disease. 2019 census trial showed that nintedanib is not only effective against idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, but it is used in interstitial lung disease of variety, including hypersensitivity pneumonitis and systemic sclerosis and polymyositis and other collagen vascular disease. Utilizing that, it is envisaged that COVID causes pulmonary fibrosis, although the pathogenesis is different. Yes. Then nintedanib and perfenidone may be used. So what we have learned till now, there is no head-to-head trial which has shown its benefit. Right. But if the person has had a severe disease and person has had severe pneumonia radiologically, and I did show some of the CTs to you. If the person has had hypoxemia, and then he recovers. Now, if this person goes home and comes back with the history of shortness of breath, and I do his 6-minute walk test, which is severely deranged or moderately deranged, I do another CT. And generally, I don't repeat CT before 4 to 6 weeks of his discharge. And if that CT shows some evidence of fibrosis, and I need not recite those findings, interstitial thickening and so on and so forth, and loss of volume, then I start them on nintedanib or pirfenidone. There is nothing to choose between the two. Some cases start showing features of fibrosis even at the time of discharge.
Yes.
And those are radiological changes associated with hypoxemia. There, very, very rarely I would have started them on antifibrotic drug. Whether it is beneficial or not, I do not know. But I am quite sure in my heart that steroids do help and anticoagulation does help. About the antifibrotic, it's a desperate strategy of minimizing the fibrosis. So far, there is no evidence, but we all use it judiciously. That should be understood.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. So we conclude here, sir. Really, you have done a great job. You have cleared almost everything in practical, all queries, all questions, and so many things we have got cleared up. And thank you very much for
Excuse me, sir.
this webinar. I request Dr. G.D. Ramchandani to kindly give a vote of thanks to both these speakers. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Parik sir, for giving me this opportunity. So, on behalf of Scientific Committee Society Epicon 2019, and today we are also included the Indian College of Physicians. I first of all, I thank our legendary speaker. I can say is a stalwart of the country and COVID stalwart, Dr. G.C. Khilnani sir, for clarifying all the latest things. And I think this topic is endless. We can discuss till morning and things is not clear, but still he has given the message in a very clear way regarding the today's situation. I still remember 4 or 5 months back when he showed one slide that today we are sitting on the time bomb. And I asked him about what is your prediction? But that time he has given the diplomatic answer. Again, I am asking, is there any prediction, sir, about this video?
Once a diplomat is a diplomat always.
I think Dr. Roy is giving some prediction about next.
The community medicine person can give.
I'm not an astrologer, so it's difficult to predict anything at this moment. Actually, see, even we don't know which variant is circulating. NCDC has not released only they released this variant status a few weeks ago. So we don't know which variant is circulating. Whatever evidence we have, we can say that a new variant is circulating and infecting very fast.
And I also thanks to second speaker, Dr. Sanjay R.K. Roy, for giving this wonderful talk on this about the vaccination and this deadly duo combination. Previously, we have done same CME and we have clarified a lot of things. The things is again a lot of things are changed, and you clarify the things. Thank you both the speakers for this sparing the time.
It's always a pleasure.
And thanks to Dr. Girish Mathur sir, who has really bring this CME in a wonderful way for asking the various clinical oriented questions. And once again, I special thanks to our chairman of this Scientific Committee Society and the pillar of this CMEs, Dr. K.K. Parikh sir, for motivating all of us to do regular CMEs. And for that, responsibility is taken by Dr. Pradyuman Sharma. He is really working hard, and every week is requesting all this legendary speakers to country and bringing out this platform to educate all the physicians and the doctors of the country. So again, big thanks to Dr. Pradyuman Sharma also. And Special thanks to all the delegates for participating. And today, I think 130, 140 delegates were there for taking part, and mostly from out of the Rajasthan. I was watching the hardly 5-6 doctors from Rajasthan, and most of them from other out of Rajasthan. So thanks once again to all of you. Thanks to speakers, and thanks to scientific.
Sir, just one word of advice now.
Pradyuman,
Yes,
That,
sir.
you want to say?
stay home.
Yes.
Sir,
Sir,
Yes,
words to all of
बोलिए,
us.
प्रद्युमन आप बोलिए please.
sir, there's an announcement on the 23rd. We are having a seminar on rheumatoid arthritis. Starting Dr. Renu and Dr. Uma Kumar from All India Institute of Medical Sciences. They will be addressing right from a patient reaching to a clinic with complaints of monoarthralgias or polyarthralgias, and the approach, biomarkers, detection, and management. So we'll be having a 23rd April. Kindly keep yourself free, for we're having a stalwart speaker from All India Institute and Dr. Renu. Please.
And on 18th April, we again have got a very big webinar on organized by API, Central API, on COVID again. So you are all welcome. You will get the link and everything.
Sunday, 18 Sunday.
So thank you very much, sir. Dr. Khilani, Dr. Sanjay Rai, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Good
Thank you
night.
very much.
Good night.
Thank you.